Don't. Don't pull it away. The rancher froze in shock, and then acted. The land stretched out in a silence that seemed older than memory, a wide sweep of prairie where dry grass whispered only when the wind remembered to pass through. The morning sky was pale and cold, the kind that drained color from the earth until everything looked like it had been washed in gray. A wooden fence leaned crooked along the dirt road, its rails broken in places, its posts half sunk into the ground as if the land itself was tired of holding them upright. Beyond it, a cabin sat alone at the edge of the valley, its roof sagging, its chimney sending up no smoke. It looked less like a home and more like something abandoned to time. A rancher rode slow across that empty stretch, his coat pulled close against the chill. His horse's breath came out in faint clouds, dissolving into the still air. He carried himself with the heaviness of a man who had seen winters too long, who had watched too many things slip away. His eyes were narrow, not because of the wind, but because the weight inside him left little room for softness. He knew loneliness the way a river knows its bed, and most days he moved through it without thinking. But this morning was different. As he neared the cabin, his horse stopped, ears flicking. The rancher felt it too, a disturbance in the silence. He dismounted, boots crunching on frozen ground, his steps careful but steady. The door of the cabin was half open, swaying on its rusted hinges. He pushed it with the edge of his hand, the wood groaning like something alive. Inside, the air smelled of dust and faint smoke, as though a fire had burned weeks ago and then given up. The floor creaked under his weight, boards bending with tired complaint. In the far corner he saw it. A figure curled tight against the wall, wrapped in a blanket that was no blanket at all, just torn cloth patched together with trembling hands. A girl, young, dirt-smudged, eyes hollow yet burning with something close to terror. She clutched a small bundle in her lap, something she held so tight her knuckles had gone white, and when his shadow crossed her, she lifted her head and whispered with cracked lips, Don't pull it away." The words barely rose above silence, but they struck him hard enough to freeze him in place. His chest locked, and in that single moment, the weight of all his winters pressed down on him, as if the world had been waiting to test him once more. The rancher stood still, the door hanging open behind him, the cold creeping in like a reminder that the world outside this cabin was as unforgiving as the silence inside it. The girl's voice still echoed in his ears, thin and trembling, words so weak they should have slipped past him, but they had rooted deep. Don't pull it away." She held that bundle in her lap as though it were the last tether between her and life itself. He could not yet see what it was, but he saw her grip, her body curled tight, her shoulders drawn up like a creature bracing for another strike. He felt the sting of recognition, not of her face, not of her frail form, but of the fear. It was the same fear he had once seen in the eyes of his younger brother, long ago, when their father's hand had come down harder than it should have. He remembered nights when the house felt smaller than a coffin, when silence wasn't peace, but a shield you learned to wear. He had run from that life, taken to the open land, to the cattle and the sky, but even now, the ghosts of that boyhood clung to him. Watching her clutch that bundle was like seeing a mirror tilted back across years he had tried to bury. He stepped closer, his boots careful on the splintered boards, and the girl flinched, her arms tightened, her eyes flashing wide with the kind of terror that begged for mercy, but expected none. He stopped where he was, holding still, his breath heavy in the space between them. He had seen that look before, on beaten animals, on sold eyres broken by war, and once, in the cracked reflection of his own face. He wanted to say something, but words felt clumsy, like stones that would only crush what little strength she had left. Part of him urged retreat. She wasn't his burden. He had enough scars of his own, enough lonely nights that reminded him he was barely keeping himself upright. Taking her in, whatever pain she carried, would drag him deeper into storms he had no strength to weather. It would be simpler to step back, to close the door, to let the world decide her fate. Men out here learned to look away, to keep their hearts guarded if they wanted to survive. But survival had never been the same as living, and he knew it. He took off his hat, running a calloused hand through hair damp with cold sweat. His eyes went again to her bundle, and then to her eyes. They were not pleading. They were resigned, as if she already knew the answer he might give. That quiet acceptance cut deeper than any cry for help ever could. He could not walk away. Not again, not after seeing himself reflected in her silence. The weight of choice pressed heavy, but his body moved before his doubt could anchor him. He set his hat down on the broken table nearby, lowered himself to one knee, and with a voice steadier than he felt, he whispered, "It's all right. I ain't here to take it from you. I'll help." The rancher's words lingered in the still air, yet they did little to ease the trembling in her body. She did not loosen her grip on the bundle, nor did her eyes lose that wary glaze. He studied her in silence, giving her space, but he knew time was not on their side. In the West, a girl left alone in a broken cabin was not a mystery without an answer. Someone had put her there, and whoever had might return. The land was cruel, but cruelty often had hands and names attached to it. He crouched lower, keeping his movements slow, and asked nothing. It was then he noticed a mark on her wrist, half hidden by the torn cloth that wrapped her. A dark bruise shaped like fingers, fresh and ugly. His jaw tightened. He had seen such marks before, on calves roped too tight, on men shackled in camps where no mercy lived. The sight filled his chest with a heat that pushed against his ribs. She wasn't just abandoned. She had been left like property discarded when broken. A sound outside snapped his attention. His horse stomped and snorted, ears flat, the way animals do when scenting danger. The rancher rose, walked to the doorway and scanned the horizon. The prairie stretched flat, but a trail of dust twisted faintly in the distance, moving toward them. Riders. His gut clenched. Whoever had left her here wasn't done. He turned back inside, his voice low, but urgent. "They're coming. Whoever they are, they're coming back." The girl's eyes widened, and for the first time, her arms loosened around the bundle. He saw what she held. A small, blood-stained doll, the kind sewn from scraps of cloth, its face nothing more than crude stitches. It was not gold, not food, not anything of value to men. It was memory. It was her last shield. She clutched it again quickly, but the brief reveal told him enough. Whatever men were coming, they hadn't left her behind because of what she carried. They had left her because she was no longer wanted, or because hurting her had been the point all along. The dust cloud drew nearer, and he counted at least 3 riders, maybe more. His chest tightened with the weight of choice once again, but there was no space left for doubt. He had stepped into her life the moment he crossed that cabin door. If he stayed, he'd draw their fire onto himself. If he fled, he'd leave her to wolves wearing human faces. Either way, blood would follow. He grabbed his rifle from the wall, fingers brush it, laying dust off the stock, and his eyes locked with hers. For a fleeting second she seemed to understand that their fates were now bound together, whether either of them wanted it or not. The riders passed that day without finding the cabin, their dust trail fading into the distance as the rancher held his breath in the doorway. When silence returned, heavier than before, he shut the door and set the bar across it. The girl had not moved from the corner, but her eyes followed him now, less with fear and more with an uncertain curiosity. He could see she was starving, her lips dry, her skin pale beneath the dirt. Without a word, he pulled a strip of dried venison from his saddlebag and set it on the table. He did not press her. He simply left it there, and after a long stretch of silence, he heard the quiet rustle of her steps as she crept forward to take it. That night, the cold crept in sharp, and the rancher lit the fire. The glow filled the cabin with a flickering warmth, pushing back shadows that had clung to its corners for too long. He noticed how she edged closer, drawn not to him, but to the fire. He stoked the flames, gave her space, and sat across the room, his rifle within reach. For hours, neither spoke. Yet something shifted in that silence, a recognition that sometimes safety was not promised with words, but proven with presence. The next morning, he led her outside. The sky was pale again, but the frost was breaking beneath the sun. He placed his rifle in her small hands, guiding her fingers gently, showing her how to hold it steady. She flinched at first, but his hands stayed calm, firm enough to guide, never to force. He did not tell her she was safe. He showed her by teaching her to defend herself. When she pulled the trigger and the shot cracked across the valley, her shoulders straightened, and for a moment he saw a flicker of life in her eyes, a spark he feared had been lost. In the quiet that followed, he rolled back his sleeve, revealing the faded scars on his forearm, old burns that never healed right. He did not explain how they got there. He only let them exist in the open. A silent truth laid bare. Her gaze lingered on them, and slowly she pushed up her own sleeve, showing the bruises that circled her wrist. No words passed, but the exchange was louder than any confession. They both carried wounds carved by others, yet in sharing them, they found an unexpected kinship. Later, as the sun dipped low and the land burned gold, he set a pot over the fire. She sat beside him this time, her doll cradled in her lap, but her body no longer pressed against the wall. They ate in silence, and in that silence was something rare, a fragile peace, a sense of belonging neither had touched in years. The prairie stretched endless outside, the threat still looming, yet for one evening it felt like they had built a small fortress of stillness against the world. It was not love, not yet, but it was trust, beginning to breathe. The peace of that fragile evening did not last. By dawn, the sound of hooves returned, louder this time, carrying voices that did not belong to strangers passing the trail. The rancher moved to the window slit, his eyes narrowing as 4 riders came into view. Their coats were dust-stained, their rifles slung careless across their shoulders, but their faces carried the sharpness of men who had carved survival from cruelty. The girl's breath caught when she saw them through the gap. Her small body went rigid, the doll clutched so tight the stitches strained. That one reaction told the rancher everything. These were the men who had left her here to die. They dismounted with laughter that cut the air, their boots hitting the frozen ground like hammers. One of them called out, his voice thick with mockery. "We knew some fool might wander into this shack. Hand over the girl, and we'll let you ride out free." The rancher stepped into the doorway, rifle in hand, the cold morning air biting against his skin. He said nothing at first, his silence heavier than their threats. The girl crouched behind the wall, but her eyes fixed on him, waiting, trembling. The leader spat into the dirt, shifting his hand to the butt of his gun. "She's ours. Always was. You think you'll change that?" His words hit like whips, each syllable carrying the weight of ownership and cruelty. The rancher's jaw tightened, his heart pounding, not from fear for himself, but from the fury that rose inside him. He had seen too many like these men, who believed power was measured by what and who they could break. The standoff stretched. Every breath felt like it might be the last. Then the rancher spoke, his voice low, steady as stone. "She ain't yours. Not anymore." The silence after was broken by a laugh, sharp and ugly, before rifles were raised. The rancher fired first, the crack echoing across the valley, dropping one man before the others could react. Chaos surged, bullets tearing into the wooden doorframe, splinters flying. He pushed the girl down, shielding her with his body, returning fire through the broken window. Every shot he took was measured, not just to kill, but to buy her seconds, breaths, chances. One of the men circled, creeping toward the back, and the girl, seeing the shadow through the wall, did something that froze him. She gripped the rifle he had taught her to hold, pulled the trigger, and the blast staggered the attacker before he could reach the door. The shock of it lit her face, terror and defiance woven together. She had saved them both in that moment. But the fight was not done. The leader rushed forward, pistol drawn, firing into the cabin. The rancher rose into the open, taking the shot meant for her. Pain tore through him, hot and deep, but he did not fall until his rifle answered back, striking the leader down. Silence followed, heavy and ringing, the kind that carries both victory and loss. Blood darkened his shirt, and he staggered, yet his eyes never left hers. He had chosen, and in that choice, he had given everything. The gunfire faded into silence, leaving only the echo of shots carried by the prairie wind. Smoke curled from the rifle barrel in the rancher's hand, and his chest heaved with effort as he leaned against the doorframe. The men lay scattered outside, some still, some crawling weakly before the cold earth swallowed their breath. The leader's pistol was a few feet away, half buried in dust, his body sprawled where he had fallen. The threat was gone, but victory did not feel like triumph. It felt like the weight of survival pressing down harder than before. Inside the cabin, the girl did not move at first. She stayed crouched, arms still wrapped around her doll, her face streaked with tears and smoke. When she finally lifted her gaze, she saw him standing there, bleeding, shoulders sagging, his strength slipping out with every drop of red that darkened his shirt. Their eyes met, and no words passed, yet a quiet understanding hung between them. He had taken her pain as his own, and the cost of that choice now ran down his side like a river. He staggered back into the room, lowering himself slowly onto the floor near the fire. The girl moved then, hesitant at first, then faster, kneeling beside him. Her small hands pressed clumsily against his wound, trying to stop what she could not stop. He did not push her away. He let her stay there, let her try, because it was not the healing that mattered. It was the bond, the way she refused to leave him to the darkness. His breathing slowed, steady but shallow. Every inhale a battle, every exhale a release. Hours passed before the sun dipped low, painting the valley in muted gold. The dead outside were nothing more than shadows now, claimed by the silence of the land. The girl had not moved from his side, her doll tucked under her arm, her hand still resting against his chest, as if to be sure he remained. He looked once more at her face. Too young to have carried so much hurt, too strong to have survived it. His lips parted, but words faltered. Only a whisper made it out. Stay. Safe. When darkness fell, he forced himself to his feet. With her help, unsteady but determined on, he stepped outside. They dug shallow graves together under the cold moonlight, the rancher's movements slow, hers guided by silence. Each body lowered into the earth was another chapter closed, but the soil felt heavier than stone. When it was done, he stood there, hat in hand, bleeding and pale, the girl at his side holding her doll like a prayer. The night grew colder, yet neither of them spoke as they walked back to the cabin. The fire still flickered, casting long shadows on the wooden walls. He eased himself down by it, she curled near him, and for the first time since he had found her, her head leaned against his arm. The silence that filled the room was not the silence of fear anymore. It was the silence of two souls bound by what they had survived. The weeks that followed passed quietly, marked not by grand events, but by small, steady breaths of survival. Winter crept across the land, laying frost over the prairie, but inside the cabin the fire rarely died. The rancher healed slowly, his strength returning in pieces, though the scar on his side remained as a constant reminder of the night he had chosen to stand between cruelty and the girl. She, too, began to change. The hollow look in her eyes softened, replaced by something fragile, but alive. She tended the horses, fetched water, and sometimes sat near the window with her doll, not clutching it in fear anymore, but holding it like memory rather than shield. The graves outside grew over with snow, their wooden markers tilting under the weight of wind. The girl sometimes placed wildflowers on them when spring finally broke through, a gesture not of forgiveness, but of closure. The rancher never asked why. He knew the act was not for the dead, but for the living, for her, and perhaps for him as well. Life did not return to what it had been before, because neither of them were who they had been before. They had been altered by violence and by mercy, and in that collision something new had been born, a quiet companionship that needed no words to endure. On some evenings they would share supper in silence, the firelight brushing their faces, the prairie stretching endless beyond the window. The world was still harsh, still filled with men who took more than they gave, but here, in this fragile space they had built together, there was a kind of peace, not perfect, not unbroken, but enough to make survival feel like more than just another day endured. Years later, travelers spoke of a rancher who lived at the edge of the valley with a girl who had grown strong under his care. Some said they were family. Others said they were simply two lost souls who had found each other. Whatever the truth, the story always ended the same, that when dusk fell and the wind carried silence across the land, one could see the faint glow of their cabin fire, steady against the dark, like a promise whispered to the night. And it was in that light that their legacy endured, quiet, haunting, and unforgotten, echoing like the last note of a violin across the wide and endless prairie.